my own experience as the Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusive Excellence, my approach and commitment to diversity is not necessarily what the institution had in mind. As Sarah Ahmed put it, quote, if institutionalizing diversity is a goal of diversity workers like myself, it does not necessarily mean it is the institution's goal. That's a really complex idea that I want us to tease out. So the fact that I'm committed to diversity, it does not mean that the institution has the same goal as I do. As Sarah Ahmed continues, EDI and anti-racist work can feel like banging your head against the brick wall. The wall keeps its place, so it's you who get sore. This is because, Sarah Ahmed explains, we as EDI and anti-racist practitioners, we do not just work at institutions, we work on them as well.
This is Nicholas Hartlip, Robert Charles Billings Endowed Chair in Education at Berea College, and you're listening to EdUp Accelerated Excellence.
This episode is supported in part by Patriox Ultra High Oxygen Content Water. Drinking Patriox helps oxygenate the body, promoting overall health, energy, and vitality. In 2026, try Patriox on your journey for accelerated excellence. Receive a 10% discount on your next purchase with the code EDUPXE. That's 10% off with the code EDUPXE at patriox.us. Patriox.us. Find more details in the show notes. Thank you for listening to EdUp Accelerated Excellence, and we have a challenge for you. The XE Listening Tour. We ask that all educators and those who support them to intentionally seek out and listen to a quiet voice, whether it be a student, a colleague, or a parent, someone you haven't regularly heard from for at least 10 minutes this week. Reflect on what you've learned about educational excellence and equity from their stories, and record your experience and insights via voicemail at edupxe.com. Your contribution may be featured on air during this podcast. So listen in the XE Listening Tour and record your responses at edupxe.com. edupxe.com. And we look forward to hearing from you. Welcome to EdUp Accelerated Excellence, the podcast for the advancement of educational excellence and equity. And I'm your host, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. And for this episode, I am so happy to share with you a recording from a recent webinar hosted by the Culture, Race, and Intersectionality Network of the International Congress for School Effectiveness and Improvement, where Dr. Pinke Mthembu and I are co-coordinators. Founded in 2023, the Culture, Race, and Intersectionality Network of ICSE welcomes inquiries and engagement in school effectiveness and improvement mediated by race, culture, and the broader notions of intersectionality. Developed from the work of ICSE's commitment on generational renewal, inclusion, and diversity, otherwise known as GRID, the CRI network recognizes and affirms the intersectionality between race and culture as an integral and significant factor for improving the future of education. Our special guest today is Professor Awad Ibrahim, and he will address the topic of Acronymization of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or EDI, and the need for EDI-Da informed policy. Dr. Ibrahim is full professor and vice provost for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusive Excellence, as well as the holder of the Air Canada Professorship on Anti-Racism at the University of Ottawa in Canada. He is a curriculum theorist with special interests in economy of hospitality, cultural studies, hip-hop, youth and Black popular culture, social foundations, social justice and community service learning, diasporic and continental African identities, and ethnography and applied linguistics. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ibrahim.
First, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Pinky, and thank you, Christina. I know you had better things to, and I know Ruth and there are other people who are joining us. You had better things to do, and you could be with your family at this point. So very, very much appreciated that you are joining us. Also shows our commitment to the work that we do. I want to begin with a physical nod to our Indigenous people. I am located in Canada, and I assume the same thing with Jacob and Allison as well. And what I want to do is I want to express my gratitude. Yes, they did not have the choice of welcoming us on this land, but they have not asked us to leave. So I'm utterly grateful that I'm also in the spirit of Blackness, when I bring the spirit of ancestors, my ancestors, who as well did not have the choice of coming to this land of ours. And I always remember, and I want all of us to be thinking about those people who crossed the Atlantic, not by choice, but by force, and because of slavery. And I always, as a linguist, listen to the language they were speaking, the language they are hearing that they do not recognize, in Portuguese or Spanish or otherwise. And I also want to assume that I'm not just myself. I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of many people, and so I want all of that to be at the back of my talk. I want to express my utter gratitude to Dr. Isley and Dr. Matumbu for your generous invitation. So thank you, and thank you again for all the people who are here. And so what I want to do, I want to do four things, and I kind of want to summarize them this way. I want to go back to a professor at Harvard, Homi Bhabha, who used to be in the UK. He makes a distinction between diversity and difference. So I want to revisit this idea and why it's so significant for all of us to be thinking about this. Second, I want to, at a time, as Dr. Isley just mentioned, when the policies and politics of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I am Canadian, so we use EDI, and there is a reason for that, and which will become clear later on. When these policies and politics are under assault, it's high time for us, as Dr. Isley mentioned, for us to define our terms and be clear about the logic of these policies and politics. at the same time acknowledging their limits and work with their radical possibilities. Really, really want us to hold on to that. So I don't want to celebrate it. I want to actually engage it in many ways and kind of work on it. So this is one thing that I want us to kind of be thinking about, engaging, not just celebrating. And I want all of us to ask this question, thinking about the U.S. context in particular. And this is essentially the discussion question that I want all of us to be thinking about. Why was it so easy, just a stroke of a pen, for Donald Trump to do away with DEI in the States? And in the States, they use DEI, not EDI. So this is really the big question that I want us to grapple with. 3, I want to make a distinction as a way to think about, to answer this question that I just posed. Why was it so easy for Donald Trump to, with the stroke of a pen, to do away with DI policy? As a way to start the question, I want to introduce what I'm calling the politics of acronymization. The politics of acronymization. And I want to introduce that as a culprit, as the reason, one of the major reasons why we had what we are currently having in the States. DEI in the States became just an acronym. People did not really grapple with it and as they should. They don't even know what it means in some cases. So you're going to use, in the States, people use different terms. So DEI and critical race theory, and so on and so forth. So this becomes kind of a facade, a kind of a fad, kind of terms. I'm suggesting if we do not define our terms, we will discover that EDI is not DEI. And that's not just a semantic, that's legal difference, which will become clear in my discussion. Again, 4th, and this is the last thing, if we define our terms, I'm arguing that we should be coupling DEI and EDI and anti-racism. They should not be seen as two separate things. But the really big question that I want all of us to grapple with is, why was it so easy for Donald Trump to do away with DEI? So let's go with the first slide. The difference, the kind of the distinction that Homi Bhabha makes between diversity and difference. In a classic article where he critiqued multiculturalism, Homi Bhabha makes an interesting distinction that is relevant to my argument about diversity versus difference. He argues that in multiculturalism, there is a distinction between what he calls, quote, a creation of cultural diversity, end quote, and, quote, a containment of cultural difference. Homi Bhabha argues that within the West's cultural tradition, although there's always an entertainment and encouragement of cultural diversities, there is also a corresponding containment of it. This containment is an event taking place in subtlety and through processes of what he calls normalization, where the dominant culture becomes ubiquitous, normalized gaze. In other words, and I'm quoting Homi Bhabha here, a transparent norm is constituted, a norm given by the host society or dominant culture, which says these other cultures are fine, but we must be able to locate them within our grid. End quote. This is what Sarah Ahmed calls diversity management. which acts as a technology of control that does everything to avoid conflict and dissent. Within diversity management, diversity has come, quote, overwhelmingly to mean inclusion of people who look different, end quote. This is Sarah Ahmed writing. Defined as such, then diversity does something really absurd. I want to pause here because this is one of my main arguments. Diversity does something really absurd. It not only keeps whiteness in place, but it makes actually whiteness as a yardstick against which everything and everyone is measured. Diversity management creates an economy of hospitality where whiteness becomes the host and those who embody diversity are turned into guests, into what she calls space invaders. And I'm quoting here Sarah Ahmed. To be welcomed is to be positioned as one who is not at home. Conditional hospitality is when you are welcomed on condition that you give something back in return. The multicultural nation functions this way. The nation offers hospitality and even love to would-be citizens as long as they return this hospitality by integrating or by identifying with the nation. People of color in white organizations are treated as guests, temporary residents in someone else's home. People of color are welcomed on condition they return that hospitality by integrating into a common organizational culture. Interestingly enough, within diversity management, diversity becomes a technology of exclusion. I emphasize, not inclusion. This is why we need to think in terms of difference. Difference works with categories: gender, social class, sexuality, race, ability, and so on and so forth. Hence the idea of intersectionality. Difference requires not only intersectionality, but strategic essentialism, I emphasize. It requires not only intersectionality, but it also requires strategic essentialism. This is Gayatri Spivak. And she argues that since we cannot deal with these social categories, gender, social class, sexuality, race, ability, and so on and so forth, all at once, and with the same force, we have to choose, in other words, essentialize one category that becomes our category of a struggle. Feminism chose gender, LGBTQIS2 plus chose sexuality, anti-racism chose race, and so on and so forth. In working with these categories, we are not making them. We are simply acknowledging their real presence and thus investigating their social and psychic impact. We need to remember, first, these are no abstract intellectual categories. These are real categories with real consequences, and they are someone's life that we are talking about. If you are a trans living in the States right now, sexuality and gender are not abstract ideas or categories. Second, we need to realize that not all categories have the same weight all the time. So we need to acknowledge the difference that makes a difference. I emphasize, and I'm speaking particularly to Pinky students here. Not all categories they have the same weight or the same force. That's why sometimes you need to make a decision. This category is the difference. I need to acknowledge it as the difference that makes a difference. In this sense, for Black people, Black lives matter. And we would argue that blue lives matter for some, but for sure not for Black people. Second argument that I'm making, equality is not equity. A very interesting, but very, very banal idea, but it's really worth kind of revisiting. We need to define our terms. Equity is not equality. Diversity is not difference. And inclusion is, again, not an abstract category. And this is just a visual way to talk about what I'm talking about. And I'm gonna explain this for Pinky students, because I'm sure the rest of us have seen it before. So this is a visual representation of equality, and I'm using I'm looking at the picture at the top. I'm starting from left to right. Equality, where it says we're going to treat everybody the same. So no matter how tall you are, no matter how wealthy you are, it doesn't matter. We're going to have that fence, and we're going to treat everybody the same. So we end up with a reality like this, where people are way over, and some people are not just beyond the fence, they are under the fence. When then we move to equity, the second picture from top, and moving from left to right, equity, where we're going to say, so equality is treating everybody the same. Equity is treating everybody according to their needs. That's why you're gonna see the boy in at the left. I assume he. I'm gonna just say he. They need more boxes. And beside that is the reality that we already have. Our aim should be the liberation idea, where we get rid of the whole fence. That's our hope. That's our ultimate goal. But I'm going to suggest is not just getting rid of the fence, but to actually kind of making the viewers themselves as part of the game itself. That's not just getting rid of the fence, but actually making people actors within the play. That's our ultimate liberation. And you're going to see the same thing with the reality, equality at the bottom. It's the same, it's a different way of expressing that. As we see in these pictures, we do not all start at the same point with the same abilities and resources. This is why, for the argument I'm making, a discussion on meritocracy is not only false, but a distraction. If you apply equality principle, then Marcos, and I'm going to just assume Marcos, I'm just going to give a character, who's a Filipino and Tagalog speaker, who arrived recently in, let's just give Australia as an example, will suffer substantially because he will be treated like anybody else. You can't treat all your class the same way. And I think, Pinky, you would agree with me on this. This is where equity becomes significant, where you're treating people according to their needs. Then there is diversity, which is a rabbit hole, since we're all diverse, even within ourselves. to bring difference into different bodies into an institution without any notion of why we need these bodies and what they are supposed to do once they are in the institution is to rewrite Sammy Greenlee's autobiographical novel, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I really, really hope you know this novel. If you don't, I highly recommend you looking it up. This is the 1950s CIA, which was almost 100% white and male. Sam Greenlee, an African American, was hired. By way of showing diversity, the CIA made him sit at the front door of the CIA building. He was the first person everyone who's entering the building will see. It's really, really interesting if you think about it from that perspective. This is the diversity which not only keeps and normalizes whiteness, but it licenses the continuation of institutional racism on the one hand, and it allows institutions to wash their hands off diversity. Diversity now has an office and an officer. Canada is hiding, and I am going to air some dear linen here, and I don't know how the situation is like in Sweden and in South Africa. It's hiding behind the idea of privacy, not to collect race data, for example. We still do not have that. We can't talk about inclusive excellence, not just inclusion. And by the way, this is my take. I was the one who chose my title as Equity, Diversity, and Inclusive Excellence. It's not just inclusion, it's inclusive excellence. So I emphasize that for a long time, having to study the history of it, for a long time, inclusion was put in competition against excellence. And that's why I'm arguing that they have to be one and the same. So inclusion can't continue to be a fluffy notion. It will never be excellent if it does not have data or if it's not data-based. How do you address people's need if you do not know who you're talking to or who we have on campus? In what follows, I want to push EDI a bit further. Even EDI, I want to push it a little bit further. So I'm talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. To a place where I actually make my own work with racism, or as the Americans would say, anti-racism. So you can go either or. Similar to categories of difference, so gender, sexuality, race, ability, and so on, we need to remember that EDI is not an office. It is not a pretty and brilliant policy we have on our institution's websites. It is a daily grinding work and practices, and it concerns everyone. And it's definitely not a destination we're going to reach. No one gets up in the morning and says, I'm so full. I'm so EDI full now. It's a daily practice. It's a grinding work. The fact that we have an EDI vice provost office does the opposite of what is intended. It permits the institution to concentrate EDI into that office and asks the vice provost to create magic. Sonia Kang argues that there are two elements that are absolutely essential if EDI is to be successful and not just performative. One, we need to approach it not as a workshop, not as one-off, but as a daily, ongoing practice that involves every single person in the institution. Two, you need a committed and visionary leadership in order for EDI to be successful that just does not talk the talk, but walk the walk as well, or walk the talk. If you don't have these two components, then institutions are devaluing the EDI work and setting up the vice provost EDI for failure. It seems to me that EDI needs the bottom up to rise, the top to lead, but it also needs the middle management as well. This middle management is a category we tend to neglect in EDI work. Having said that, if we want to talk social justice, it seems to me that we need to go one step up the ladder. Because of time, I will simply say anti-racism strategically centralizes race as a point of departure. As we think about intersectionality, because there is something about race that brings chill in the room, I emphasize. We can talk gender, we can talk sexuality, we can talk everything else. As soon as you bring race, people's spines go up, hair go up, and something happens in the room. There's chill. And it is probably the only category that people do everything to avoid. This is why anti-racism calls into question that category. That categories of difference are created to distribute power differently to different people and rank people. So this is why anti-racism essentializes race to begin with. And then it says that there are some categories that the intersectionality that we're talking about, these are categories to distribute power. This is a power question more than just categories. I'm going to go faster. If EDI calls for evolutionary change, anti-racism calls for revolutionary change. Anti-racism calls into question the false dichotomy we created in the academy between the academy and the community. This is a false dichotomy. This idea of the Ivy League versus, the community on the ground. The struggle is in the academy is as important as the so-called community. Anti-racism is addressed to all students. Indeed, in places like the one where Allison is at right now, where everybody looks alike, think alike, dress alike, that is where anti-racism becomes even more important. It's more important, I would assume, for Christina, in Christina's context, more important than if it's in New York. Anti-racism is about dismantling white male privilege and status quo and ask this question: whose knowledge is privilege and why? Finally, anti-racism is about opening up spaces so that people can locate themselves in time and space. And here I'm addressing Pinke's students. Let me just reread this. Anti-racism is about opening up spaces so that people can locate themselves in time and space, and at the same time question the adequacy of that location. With our eyes wide open, let us create a welcoming climate that keeps spiritual and mental health questions alive. If we're not good to ourselves, we're not good to anyone else. And Jacob, I think you would agree with me on that. Let us always remember that life is a story, and we are the author of that story. My hope is we are going to write beautiful story, poetic story. By the end of the day, anti-racism is an act of love, as it is showing on the slide.
An act of love. What a great ending to this webinar, with provocative questions and thoughts around how we can advance educational excellence and equity in our institutions. Thank you, Dr. Awad Ibrahim. And we challenge each of you to join the XE Listening Tour. Challenge yourself this week to listen to a voice that you often don't hear from. whether it be a parent, a student, or a community member. Reflect on what you learned from their story regarding educational excellence or equity, and then share your insights via a voicemail at edupxe.com. That's edupxe.com. And your contribution may be featured on air during this podcast. And we look forward to hearing from you. This episode is supported in part by Patriarch's Ultra High Oxygen Content Water. Drinking Patriarchs helps oxygenate the body, promoting overall health, energy, and vitality. In 2026, try Patriarchs on your journey for accelerated excellence. Receive a 10% discount on your next purchase with the code EDUPXE. That's 10% off with the code EDUPXE at patriarchs.us. Patriarchs.us. Find more details in the show notes.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience Network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Radio, YouTube, and other outlets where you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow us and share within your network. To leave a comment or suggest a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com.